Hey, all you wiretappers out there, Gary Jenkins, retired Kansas City Police Intelligence Unit detective and sergeant by the time I got done, the time I retired. Anyhow, I'm back here in the studio with another story about the Gambino family. Gambino family is, were really a hell of a family. They were big money makers, and Castellano was one of the bigger money makers. I don't know what God he was thinking of. He wanted the power. But but Castellano under him, they really made the money. I'm going to tell you about one of their bigger money makers that I just stumbled across. A lot of you guys may already know about it, but I was watching some video on YouTube and I saw this surveillance video. Is really good. It was like they were right there on the street of some cars and people coming and going from the Ravenite. And this was after Gotti had taken over, as you know, if he's going in and out of the Ravenite. And it showed a guy pulling up in a big black Lincoln, it looked like a mafia staff car, and going in. So I made a little short on it and I threw it out on my YouTube channel. And I said, who are these guys? And so they named this was Salvatore or Tor Locascio was going into the Ravenite. And actually, that's what brought all the Gambino family into this conspiracy because he was in and out of the Ravenite so much. That dumbass John Gotti made everybody come in there all the time. And, they say, hey, there's a mob guy. Now let's go see what he's doing. I've done that. You see a guy coming and going and he's talking with real deal mafia members, and he may be a relative. And then in this case, his dad was Frank Locascio, who was a longtime capo and longtime Gambino family member, and became Gotti's consigliere. Locascio kind of, he hadn't really been that high profile during this time. Sal, or Tor, as they called him, Tor Locascio, had not been that high profile. That was one of the reasons that the Gambino family ended up going down, because what you do is you see that guy and then let's go take a look at him. Let's go get his trash. Let's go follow him around a little bit. Let's go see where he's going when he's not here. And then you see him at certain business, and you start looking at that business, and it just keeps the blocks just keep building and building and building. And in the end, many of these Gambino guys, and especially in Bonanno guys, even more broke ranks and became government witnesses. And Gambino, most importantly, it was the guy with the podcast out there, he who shall not be named, Sammy the Bull, I don't mind naming him, and the government went after him on some of these more complicated, sophisticated things, not just the gambling, which is easy. Throw some wires out there and, some bookies, and you kind of run the string out and take off some gamblers. And then, all of a sudden that's done. Well, they go in and come back out in a few years. So just this ongoing battle, kind of a cat and mouse game, which I used to love. To me, it was just a game, but it has been extremely profitable for a lot of these guys. And here's a high-tech scheme that came out in the late 90s on into the early 2000s. Salvatore Tor Locascio and a guy named Richard Martino, we used to call him Richie from the Bronx, orchestrated some elaborate scams involving the internet and telephone services. And these guys, they exploited unsuspecting telephone users, cell phone users, and web surfers out there, people who like porn sites in particular. And they took in over $400 million over about 5 years' time. Now, what they did is they created several porn websites. Now, these sites lured visitors with the promise of free tours around the porn site to see if you wanted to sign up, but you had to give your credit card information. How many times have you gotten a free thing, a trial version of something, but you had to put in your credit card information? You'll think, well, I'll go watch the movie for free and with my trial version, but then you leave your credit, now you're signed up. So they'd get the credit card information. And what these sites did, they disabled their browser's back button and trapped them on the website as they're running up charges as they navigated through the different content. They think they're just on this free viewing tour of a porn site, and they're not. They're getting charged like crazy. This has been other websites have done this where they make it really difficult to exit the website, and they want to keep that credit card in there. What's funny is Locascio was under house arrest from another case, an old case, when they started working on this. Him and this Richard Martino, or Richie from the Bronx, became the largest consumer fraud at the time in American history. They found a guy named Norman Chains who was a direct marketer, and they developed these network of porn sites, and they had to get an age verification check so you could get a free preview of the sexual content. Now that's like they spread out this banquet, and you have to jump through a hoop. Okay, I'm of age, I can get this free preview. I mean, it's scamming at its best. Put your credit card in there, and then they hit each one of these people from anywhere from $25 to $75. Later on they get this charge a month or 2 months later, and that's it. So they also started a phone scam thing as known as cramming. I don't know if you remember cramming, and this actually ended up in Overland Park, Kansas, right here in Kansas City. I remember getting some leads for us to go out and look at some buildings and write down some license numbers in connection with this back then. Uh, what they did is they had 800 numbers. Now, you remember the 800 numbers, and they would charge you a lot of money, but they'd make it look like it was free. It was like for sex talk, sex lines. I know somebody that their parents got a huge charge for a sex line thing. Psychics, horoscopes from these 800 numbers instead of free services, which are promised. Whoever has the phone gets this huge bill, and it's a recurring bill many times. They'll put it on there, and then you have a hard time getting it off. And then they'd have shell companies out there, and those profits would go through the shell companies and then come back into the mob, of course. They did this all over the Midwest primarily, and charged people for services that they didn't request, didn't want. And like I said, the billing came back through something called USP&C in Overland Park, Kansas. I thought Michael Franchise, or not actually, the father had some piece of this action, and it probably was maybe more than the Gambino family. These guys, they worked with advertising people and sophisticated publishing executives to execute their plan. They had all these Peckerwoods, these scourge-on looking people on the surface, and everybody was making a lot of money. And this Locascio, he really had, he'd been a gambler before, but he grossed millions and millions of dollars on this. The company, his telecommunications companies that created several companies, were in a converted carriage house in Manhattan in the Murray Hill area on East 39th Street. They had a two-car garage, and they converted that into offices. And they say this Richie from the Bronx would drive around in a white Rolls Royce or had a black Mercedes. And we saw, and you see, if you're on YouTube, I'm playing some of this video of him and his Tor Locascio and his black Lincoln coming in. Looks like I called a mafia staff car. And I tell you what, here's how much money they made. Locaccio's income started at $2.8 million. And he reported his adjusted gross income, $2.8 million in 1995. By 1997, he's earned around $6 to $7 million. It was crazy. This Richie Martino, he had been a major earner for the Gambino family for quite a while. He had really expensive homes in a couple of different places. One of them was Southampton in New York. They said he wore like Prada shoes, like $1,000 pair of shoes, and drove the Mercedes, and just been involved in petty crimes. He started out with audio text. He supplied customers with what they called pay to listen 900 numbers for sports, weather, and spicy chats, the old sex lines. And then they had these deceptive 800 numbers that appeared to be free. And they would route these through carriers, from to Kansas to Dominican Republic. And he hired a bunch of women to talk dirty in several different languages, depending on what your language was. And they would always have the X-rated call center in tax-exempt free trade zones. And it was, I mean, these guys were smart. This Martino was a pretty smart dude. And a lot of the other people were going in and out of the Ravenite too, and Martino. And again, that's, FBI starts seeing these people and seeing them together. And what are they doing? One thing I read that New York Daily News got some records, and they said that like five of his phone numbers that he had out here that were earning money drew 500,000 calls, 500,000 calls a month. He was pulling in, Martino was paying himself on the surface $3 million a year in that declared salary. It was just crazy. Of course, at that time, federal and state regulators are swamped with complaints about this. Parents are mad, but nobody can figure it out. It's all these attorney generals throughout the different states, and nobody really puts it together until the feds can put it together and tie it into the mob, and then they can take one long look at it. But by the time they get around to all that, they said that they grossed about $500 million from this phone cramming operation, and the sentences weren't all that much. Locascio got 2 years, and Martino got 9 years. I mean, it's just crazy what they did. It was just unbelievable that when they prosecuted this case, the defense was that a reasonably prudent customer or consumer should have figured out what was going on and avoided these extra charges and been able to, more like it was a computer glitch, or like, the customer didn't know how to work the system. Government said, hey, this is organized crime. We had those video surveillance of Gotti's Ravenite Club and all that kind of stuff. And the people that worked there who testified, they had to agree that they all whispered and joked around about their boss's rumored mob connection. They said this Richie Martino, he said one time he dressed down a coworker with a voice that it was very hard and had a cold quality, and it was very, very creepy. And in the end, 11 Gambino family members and associates pled guilty to multiple crimes in this scam. And another thing that Locascio, kind of a little personal thing, I interviewed Mikey Scars DiLeonardo. He was part of the operation that was extorting money from this Scores gentlemen's club in Manhattan. They made Gambinos made a ton of money off of that, and Michael DiLeonardo, they didn't make a case on him. They made a small case, and they didn't have much of a case on Locascio, and he pled guilty to some kind of a tax thing in that, I believe. But that's he's out of prison now, and Martino probably is too. And I don't know what happened to them. They're pretty old now. But anyhow, that's just a little story about one of the many scams that the white collar crimes that the Gambino family did, even though, that was Castellano saying, not Gotti's saying, but Gotti dang sure took the money. You know that. Anyhow, so thanks a lot, guys. Don't forget, I like to ride motorcycles. And if you have a problem with PTSD and you've been in the service, be sure and go to that VA website, get the hotline number, drugs and alcohol, which goes hand in hand with PTSD. Go see our friend Anthony Ruggiano, son of a former Gambino man. And I think Anthony maybe was a Gambino soldier himself. There's some disagreement about that, whether it was actually made. But anyhow, he's not made anymore. He's doing alcohol and drug rehabilitation. He's a counselor. And he's got a hotline on his website. Remember, like and subscribe and tell your friends about the show and send it around. I'm always trying to get more listeners, more viewers. I hate to say it, but I sound kind of like bad. I feel, I worked for the government too long, but I make more money, and, I like to make more money, and it kind of gives me more incentive, and all these great comments that I see, especially on YouTube, but Facebook too. And people seem to like this stuff. And, I like doing it. I really enjoy looking into these cases. And it's almost like, my last little, foray into being a policeman or being an investigator, and coming up with schemes and putting them together and then sharing it with other people. We just don't prosecute anybody anymore. So thanks a lot, guys. Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks a lot.